Welcome everyone to yet another update for Ashes of Creation. This one is all about freeholds, which are player housing plots that can be situated within the zone of influence of a village, which means a node that is stage 3 or higher. So basically your own farm that you can place almost anywhere you want in the wilderness, in the open world. And this is just one of the 4 housing systems in the game, the others being static housing, apartments and inns. Freeholds have 3 main purposes. 1. To allow players to express themselves with a unique combination of housing, buildings and furniture. 2nd. The highest level of processing is only accessible on a freehold. This relates to the economy, as processing is one of the 3 primary branches that exist within the Artisanship system. Processing is kind of the intermediary step between what you gather in the wild and what you eventually craft via recipe. And the 3rd main purpose, freehold owners can build business buildings to offer services. This means that if you wish, you have the capability to interact with other players as they're walking past your freehold, as they're hunting, exploring, or questing. This means that location can be important if you decide to offer business services on your freehold. One thing that really differentiates freeholds from player housing in other games is that in Ashes of Creation, freeholds are really part of the world in which the players are and are doing things in. Because think about other MMORPGs, where player housing is its own separate or instance zone, and it's just a remote and isolated part of the game. And another unique aspect is that players will have a lot of freedom in where buildings go, which ones you choose, and how many of them you want. For example, you could sacrifice some building space for additional farming space or vice versa. You could change your layout from this to something like this, where it will be way more farming focused, with a lot of space for your crops. Honestly, I feel like some of the devs in this game played Final Fantasy XIV because housing kinda sucks in all these aspects in that game. Alrighty, that's cool and all, but how exactly do you get to own a freehold? Well, you follow a few steps. The first thing you'll have to do is complete a quest to unlock the ability to get a freehold permit. Then go in the zone where you want your freehold to be, which is called a node. Bid on a freehold permit, then use your permit to claim any available parcel in the issuing node's region. And finally, place your freehold inside the area of the claimed parcel. Or, alternatively, you could just skip all of that and buy a freehold from another player. And there's even a 3rd option, which is to become a family member of someone who owns a freehold. Then they can give you access to everything in there. Now, having this type of system, some of you might be worried about immersion and visual fidelity. So to answer any questions that might appear, I'll mention that freehold density in the open world is not intended to be significant. The developers do not want you to run through the world and at every glance to see someone's freehold. These spaces will be partitioned and there will be minimum distance between different freeholds. And obviously, there will be places where you'll not be able to place a freehold, such as points of interest, roads, or dungeon areas. Now, obviously, a freehold wouldn't be a freehold without a house. So let's talk about this important aspect. This is the first necessary thing that you must build on your empty plot of land. The house can be either small, medium, or large, and it will influence the amount of furniture a player can place on their freehold. This is a balancing factor through which the player will determine if they want to have a larger house versus a smaller house with more farmland but less furniture. And keep in mind that not all furniture is cosmetic. There are functional pieces that, for example, could give you buffs, or they could bolster your consumable items. But hey, aesthetics are important too, so let's talk about that next. The housing system includes the ability to customize its appearance, and here we can see a few different examples of housing that's representative of 8 different races. Depending on your node type, you will find a vendor that sells a house blueprint, and that house blueprint will correspond to the racial influence of that specific node. This also has market implications. So, if you'd want, you could travel to different nodes and buy housing blueprints. Or you could hunt bosses for a chance to acquire unique blueprints. And all of these can be sold to other players. Hey, when the game releases 50 years from now, I'll try to get myself a pirate house, cause it kinda looks cool. Alright, and since we moved in this direction, let's talk about the business side of a freehold. Businesses serve a specific function, and that is providing services to players through certain buildings. A good example would be the tavern building, where you could sell a unique food buff to other players. And if you placed your freehold in a strategic place, such as close to a hunting ground, you could make some serious coin by selling an XP buff, for example. And for some other players that might be close friends with you, you could even add them to your family through the family system. And as you would expect, you could share the functions of a freehold with your family. This can be done through access lists that can be used to mimic co-ownership. But back to our tavern example, let's use it in order to understand the types of upgrades that are possible for buildings. So, depending on how you're trying to set up your freehold, buildings could have upgrade paths to make them better or worse or more specific in a certain lane of specialization. After placing down a building and becoming more proficient at the thing it provides. In the case of artisanship, or as you work with a business building, you essentially build up the building to be better at some things rather than others. In this specific example, we place down the tavern building, and we are really focused on wanting people to come by and gain extra experience in the form of rested experience. So we'll upgrade our tavern to have the feather beds bonus from the building tree upgrade. Now let's put businesses aside for the moment, and let's talk a little bit about artisanship. Each crafting and processing profession will have a building associated with it. Before you can place any stations down that are associated with that crafting or processing profession, you'll have to construct your building. Once the building is constructed, you will see a technology tree, like in the case of the tavern we just saw. And similarly, you can spec this tree in the direction you want as well. And yeah, now the building basically gives you action to build stations, and may also give benefits to all related stations on the freehold. As an example, let's say there's some sort of weaponsmith bonus given by a weaponsmithing building. That would mean that your weaponsmithing stations on the freehold would all receive that bonus. It is also important to know that the highest level of processing can only happen on the freehold, and that's master and grandmaster processing. On the crafting side, however, players can only get up to journeyman level when crafting on their freeholds. But back to the strong point of freeholds, let's introduce the process of processing. While progressing through a profession, players will discover there are 4 processing stations that unlock progressively. Each one of these stations can produce goods that are immediately useful to the economy, to crafters, to other processors, and each processing station will build on itself into the other stations. Also, in addition to raw resources required in a recipe, these processing stations require a certain amount of fuel to fulfill the recipe's fuel cost. And any item may have a fuel value, and players can mix and match different fuels together to fulfill the fuel value of a recipe. For example, iron ore would require some coal or some wood pellets as fuel to complete the recipe. Now, let's talk a little bit about the depth and progression when it comes to the lumber mill. This is an example of an artisanship building, specifically a processing building. What you see on the screen will be similar to what you saw in the tavern example earlier. You'll be able to place down the lumber mill in order to advance in the lumber profession, and you'll be able to specialize it based on what you want to focus on. What we are looking at here is the Arcane Golem specialization. It allows you to process with reduced cost and better efficiency. It is also placed at Tier 5 as the final upgrade in that path. In the bottom left corner, we can see the other benefits that have been activated on the way to the Golem perk. Steven states that as you spec into these specific upgrades, the building itself will manifest props and attachments that represent these different upgrade paths. So we've got a little bit of that coolness factor in there, because as a player, you might walk by someone's tavern and see they've got the bar and the window upgrade, meaning you could roll up and get a quick snack and a drink that grants you a buff. Or you could notice that they went down a certain path for the lumber oil upgrade and realize that this is probably the processor that you want to reach out to for all your wood needs. Now let's take a look at an in-game freehold. In this particular example, the player has a lot of farming stuff, as that is their main focus, but they've also got an artisan building, as they are well positioned for some mining opportunities. They are present in these ruins in the form of Halcyonite, a mid-tier journeyman gem that could be used in weapons and jewelry crafting or for decoration, so it could be considered pretty valuable. Oh, and also, here's a little explanation about gathering and about farm life.
Yeah, so So each gathering profession will have 3 tools. The tools kind of come online as you progress through the profession, and the different resource types for each one of the profession may require different tools. So you basically want to carry around the right tool for the job, and tools along with artisanship gear will have stats on it. So you can itemize towards how you want to gather, how fast you want to gather. Yeah.
Yeah, so the farming is gonna generally focus on growing crops like this and then dealing with livestock over there like that. But
nice.
generally what you want to do is gather some seeds from either vendor or in the world you can gather or find some seeds on the open content, and you're gonna come to your freehold, plant them, and then depending on what kind of processing level you have and what kind of processing stations or buildings you might have, you might grow crops like a little faster.
Nice.
Produce like better crop rotations, and just generally farm things that's unique to farming produce, like compared it to the in the open world.
Another cool thing about farming too, since it has the livestock, is that it kind of feeds directly into hunting and synergizes with animal husbandry. So if you're interested in raising animals, taming animals, farmers will have a use for them.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, animal husbandry has multiple lanes of ways to breed and specialize your creatures, and mounts and pets are one of the more popular ones, but then obviously livestock as well. So not only can you breed your animals for traits such as like movement speed and health and different combat stats, but you also be able to breed them for desirable traits like, fertility, increased harvesting yield, and even increased yield from butchering.
What are you guys doing?
And now, let's move on to the art updates. We've got the stool used earlier for the milking, and the shears used on the sheep. We also have some chickens, the classic things you would expect on a farm. But also some stuff you wouldn't, like these crabfish. Be careful not to catch one of these while fishing. There's also the Felgaze Stalker mount. And following up, we've got some nice armor sets, like the Desolation Outlander set, the Second Sword set, the Sons of Fortune, and some Soulseeker variants. We also have a couple of masks, starting with the Tormentor's Visage and the Midnight Mask. And last but not least, the in-game models for the Nikuan race. And with that, we've covered everything for today. As always, thank you for watching. Don't subscribe if you did not enjoy the video, but nevertheless, I hope you have a wonderful day.